Tick tack, it's my clock telling me I should get up.
Hi, and welcome to The Conscious Loop, where woo-woo and the real world collide. I'm your host, Katrina DeAngelis. Join me as we explore what it looks like to live consciously almost always. Each episode, we dive into transforming mindsets and shifting paradigms through topics such as developing self-awareness, living authentically, communication, strengthening relationships, and leading from the inside out. If you're ready to break out of your unconscious loops and discover what else is possible, you came to the right place. You ready? Let's dive in. Brittany, it is so good to have you here on the show. I'll share a little bit with the audience as well for those who are here listening. The reason why I wanted to have Brittany here on the show was because I was just so inspired by her drive, her ambition, the way that she's made some decisions in her life, especially being so young. I'll say that. As a Gen Z, we were having a fun conversation about what that means and what Gen Z versus millennial and all that kind of means. But I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to hear some of the ways you have moved through life, the decisions you've made, and some of the unconscious loops that you've had to rewrite, unwire to be who you are today. And then we can jump into what is next for you. So, Brittany, I'll allow you to just jump in and introduce yourself to the audience.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super stoked to be a guest today. Hey everyone, I'm Brittany. I am a brand and e-commerce manager who also does freelance kind of marketing, digital marketing strategy on the side. So that's been new, exciting. Do you want me to give like a background as well? Yeah.
Let's dive into that. Let's dive in. One thing I found really interesting when you shared your story, a few things. One, you were like completely unapologetic and just like fully owned your path around, especially your decisions around a university, just going into your career, the success that you've had in your career. And the part I found really interesting when you start to share your story is I feel like a lot of those pieces can have different connotations to them, whereas you just fully own them. So share some of those decisions that you made in your career and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. It's just even from being a child, like I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. They don't think of things so mainstream, like it's nothing is black and white. Like you're just figuring out your way through life. And I'm very blessed. I have successful parents who I would take their advice in a heartbeat. They know what they're doing. Even just growing up, I had that influence. And so all throughout mostly high school, I would say, but even in childhood, like I wasn't approaching things the same way. So we would have fundraisers in elementary school and all the kids would be either like asking relatives for donations. Like I was like sitting at the corner of my street with like my mom selling homemade ice cream and raking in the dough for Heart and Stroke or whatever the organization was. So it was never, I don't know, I just always had a different kind of opinion on how to do things. Like I just always tried to make things exciting for myself. And I really think that's the key, right? Like just to find joy. And we'll get into that later, I'm sure. But so to give you a little bit more of a background, throughout high school, I was doing things like that. My part-time summer jobs were more entrepreneurial. I hosted a fundraising event. And when I got to university, I got involved in a student entrepreneurial group and I was leading a team. And I go by this phrase actually. It's called like, how does it go? It's throw enough mud, something will stick. So I started applying to all of those like extracurricular activities and stuff. And unfortunately, I was in the kind of cohort where I had most of my first year in person. But after that, COVID hit and I was in business school. I was just soaking it up, like loving it. I wasn't the type, like you hear all these dramatic stories about, which nothing wrong with that, with people who don't really, education is their thing. They don't like memorizing. So they go and they do something entrepreneurial just to break out of that. I was never like that. I liked school. I liked learning. I liked the people I was learning from, but I was soaking up all these extra things. And then COVID hit and I was just stuck with what the system had and the bones of it. And I was doing extracurricular like startup things. And like I said, I was just applying for things and seeing what would stick. And I ended up a VP of marketing at a student-led startup. And I was managing a team of fourth years when I was in second year. Like it was just, that shouldn't happen, but like it does based on your knowledge. It's really not about where you're at in life and even your age in university. So that was something I learned really fast. And I've always been the type that I have a growth mindset just naturally. My mom and dad are very much that way, so I think I was lucky and just learned that from them. But yeah, I was just soaking it all in. I was learning on the fly, and I so as the VP of marketing of a startup, like, we were in an incubator, we had goals, like, we were growing, and with that, you can't take your university textbook and apply it to digital marketing. It's not built for that. So, I was left with a system, and I would talk to profs, and I would say, "Listen, what the heck? Like, this isn't cutting it. Like, I'm sitting here memorizing definitions, and I'm never gonna be able to apply this to anything." Of course, there is a time and place for university, but for me, it wasn't working, and I was really frustrated, and they would say, "Yeah, we know." And that was it, and no one's doing anything about it. So, I do think there is a path for education to change, but yeah, I was just fed up, and there were some other obstacles that I ran into, and I was like, "Okay, rejection is redirection, screw this," and I left and was like, I on the startup, that was also icky because it was all students. So I had already transitioned, out of it just because I don't know, just into different things, and because it was student run through the school, you're not paid, and I was, like, doing a full-time job, and I was like, "Okay, I could be paid for this at this point." So I'm very grateful for the experience that it was providing for me, but yeah, after a while, I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna freelance it," and I left and started freelancing, and I was in that time, I felt really lost, I'm not gonna lie, it's not always pretty, but yeah, after that, I was doing a lot of just getting to know myself. What do I want? What do I wanna be doing? And I probably did a lot of really shitty proposals for people, and I'm sorry if they were on the receiving end of that, but that's how you grow. So I did sign a couple clients, and I was working with them, and I started actually being more active on LinkedIn because that was where my goal was, and an old co-op placement actually reached out to me and asked me to be their brand manager, and that's where I am today.
Wow, beautiful. There's so many things there that I wanna follow up on. So, one piece you mentioned is rejection is redirection, and you mentioned
Mhm.
it wasn't an necessarily an easy path, like, you were still trying to find out who you are in many ways. There was a lot of just seeing what sticks, proposals, getting clients, all this sort of thing. So, tell me, what was the biggest hurdle to overcome when you left university? What was that, like, initial rejection that helped redirect you? And then how did that actually help you in being willing to fail along the way, or being willing to not win on a proposal, or not get a client, or not put yourself out there and know that can be difficult, right? That is
Mhm.
difficult for a lot of people, and so what really helped you move through that?
I actually think it came before. Like, it wasn't so much I was blessed. I wasn't in a financial situation where I was, like, on the hook for rent or, like, anything like that, so I was able to just I was what, 19, 20 years old, 20. I went back to my parents' house, and I was like, "Here we are," and they were supportive along the way, which was awesome. So yeah, but it happened before where I was like, "What the heck do I do?" I was just so fed up, and I think before I actually made the move, um, I was having all the feelings, and I was like, "Okay." You almost just have to say, "If I'm not meant to be doing this, someone intervene. I don't know what to do here." And that was before I got more into your mind as a function for creation and those kinds of things, and manifestation and creating your own reality that way. I was just, "What is the purpose of this? What do I do?" And I was forced out, which ended up being a blessing. And I think you just have to look at everything that way. Of course, there is a system that is mainstream, and you go to school, you get the entry roles, you get the experience, then you move up. And I think you just have to challenge that and say there is unlimited free resources out there to be learning and figure out what you want to be doing. Yeah, I do think it came before, and just those little steps that forced me out in a way, made the decision more clear. So I wasn't always super confident about it, but I did always have a trust that you have to have, that it's gonna work out, and you just have to be confident enough to try stuff, which is, like, still a daily struggle, but we're getting there.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. So, really being comfortable in the discomfort, trusting the process, not knowing that rejection is redirection, finding your resources and support system as well. That seemed like it was, definitely something that helped you early on and probably continues to help you, where it's just being resourceful, and then
Mhm.
also knowing and determining where and who your support systems are so that you do have that comfort. So seeking out what's in your environment that's already available to you, and then listening to the signs that the universe is throwing at you, because a lot of times that tension or those things that come up along the way, right? The conversation with your professor or the experience with your co-op, like these experiences are nudges from the universe, and so it sounds like you very much followed the breadcrumbs of curiosity to get where you are today, and that was one of the things that I loved hearing about your journey. And one other thing I wanted to follow up on, because you mentioned as well, you mentioned looking and seeking out joy. So I'm curious at how that has played a role in your life in seeking joy.
Yeah, you know what? This has only become a real thing for me that I've been experiencing in the last, call it, year. Before that, there was always something that I was trying to overcome, whether it was leaving university and the resistance that came with that, or whatever it is. I was so busy in life and in getting to the next that I didn't really, you don't stop and think, okay, how will I feel when this all happens? Like when it comes to fruition, you don't, it hits you. And eventually, in every area of my life, things were completely lined up. Like, in every way. So I got to a point and I just started getting anxious. It was very weird. So when I was a child, I had situational anxiety. So I think it was partly like your body resorts to that because it feels comfortable. And you don't really realize until you are like fully immersed in what you have, call it, manifested, or what you've always wanted. Like your joy, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, what's gonna drop?" And you have to get into this new, call it, like, habit or feeling that, no, you're okay, like, you are held, nothing is going to happen. If something happens that's not really what you wanted, like, it's always in your best interest. And I think, like, part of it is just constantly telling yourself that. Part of it is I listen to a lot of podcasts that talk about it, different things, reading articles, like how do you are literally rewiring your brain and your emotions. And I was noticing it. It was very obvious to me because I would be like so happy and then randomly be like, what if this happens? And it's like, really? There's literally no evidence of that. Like what brain, like what are you doing? No, this is so offside. Like you're unhinged right now. Get back. So but it feels so real to you in the moment, like, you're like, "What are you doing?" So, I think a lot of it is meditating and journaling it out and saying, like, "You're okay now, like, it gets to be okay, and it is safe to experience joy," and I think that's something a lot of people struggle with. Even if you just observe, like, in conversations, people, and it's just inherent, like, it's pre this kind of human evolution where you're on survival mode, like, you need to figure out where your next meal is coming, or I am in no way a scientist, but it is like a pre this kind of age thinking. So you are on guard. You're more drawn to the negative. So we have to be conscious to try to not do that.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. And what's an example that you have navigated recently where you've maybe noticed that you go to a more negative mindset and you've had to really work on shifting it to be able to experience and open up and allow yourself to experience more joy? What is the either mindset, experience, and how did you, or even how do you continue to shift that in the moment when it does come up?
Okay, so I'll answer your first question first. So the most prominent example that I can probably give you is I've never had really a really hard time career-wise. I'm so young. There's probably just haven't hasn't been room for that. I don't know. Obviously, I went through a kind of transition point, but and obviously that was hard, but there was never that situation that came up. But I do have a very unique family dynamic and childhood story. Like my family is a blended family that we've just all adopted each other, and it's amazing. And that happened when I was very young, but there are old feelings with like old relationships with like in a family way. So it was coming up in my relationship. So I'm like very happy with my boyfriend. Nothing has ever come up where we're both on the same page, where it's great. Like most people are like, "No, you're too good to be true." Like, "No, we're very happy. There's no problem." But when I was moving, so I bought a condo, and when I was moving, all of these feelings were coming up. "Oh my gosh, what if this happens?" And they weren't like real thoughts. Like I can't even put a phrase to what I was feeling. I just felt like anxious, and I was like hyper analyzing like everything, which I had never done before. Like I was like, we've always just clicked and everything's been good. And so it was just weird. I was like, hey, this is not what the reality is. Like, why am I going here? And it's because everything was going so well that I was like, okay, we need to look out for me to be hurt somewhere. Okay, I'm like moving in this direction. What could go wrong there? I'm like, what could go wrong at work? But the most that stood out was that. And I think that's just because that's the piece of my life that has always, not always, but as an infant, and that's where you pick up those emotional behaviors is you think in that way. And so it's just been overcoming that. And I did a lot of journaling, a lot of meditation, and I think it's just connecting back like to your to who you are as a divine being and like looking inwards and saying, okay, as within, so without, what is going on? Because this isn't real. And it just stops after a while.
Yeah. Wow. I resonate with that too. And sometimes it catches you by surprise. Like you said, things were going so well. And then all of a sudden, they're not. And not even that they're not going well. It's just that your mind is all of a sudden
Yeah.
looking for reasons as to why it's not. And I think that's something like for us all really to be cautious of, where it's if that does happen, checking in with ourselves. And I think that's the key here is this coming from me, or is this coming from external? Is it coming from somebody else? Is it coming from an experience that I had that I'm now projecting onto this scenario and onto this person? And sometimes that can be the hardest part because feelings are so real, right? Like when you do feel
Yeah.
something and you go into overthinking and overanalyzing, like your brain doesn't know the difference between what you're telling yourself or what's actually happening. For your brain and your experience in your body, it feels very real. And so being able to get curious with your own brain, get curious with your own
Mhm.
thoughts, um, rather than just projecting it onto somebody else. And also having those discussions and owning that as well. So I'd be curious, like with your partner, did you have conversations around that where you shared, this is what I'm experiencing and this is what's going on for me? And what was that like? Because sometimes that also helps in being vulnerable. And I think a lot of us
Mhm.
we might think that we want to be vulnerable, but then when the situation arises, maybe we're not as vulnerable because we're holding it in. And so I'm curious what that experience was like with your partner and how vulnerability played a role.
We've always had very good communication, so there was never it didn't arise in a problem, and honestly, he probably didn't even know I was, like, hyper anxious about everything, but a time did come where I was like, "Okay, it's gonna be okay," or like, "Can we just," and then we're constantly reassuring each other, and when those moments arise, like, he's very supportive, so there was never any, like, problem, but I think everyone goes through that, right? There's times where he's been like, said something where I'm like, "Of course, whatever it is, right? Of course I think you're handsome. What are you talking about?" But it's you just get into your own head. So sometimes you just need to I think social media really plays a negative role in that. Like sometimes that's just one example, but sometimes you're just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm looking at all these like models and celebrities or whatever. I need to just stop. That's okay, that's over there, but I'm here and just being grateful for who you are and what you have and yeah, so to answer your question and not go on a tangent, it was never an issue and it was just, "What do you need?" "I need reassurance." "Okay, great." And he continued to show up, I continued to show up, and
Beautiful. Needs. So that was a big topic of conversation actually on a recent podcast, and it's so important. Determining what your needs even are. Knowing and realizing, "Oh yeah, I do need reassurance right now," or "I do need to hear this from you," or "I do need to ask you this," like whatever that is, and being able to articulate it. And that's the vulnerability part to me. I think it's like being able to express your needs. That's not easy for everyone. And yeah, I appreciate that in you. And so when you think about the next step for you, right? Like you've moved through a lot, whether it's relationships, career, making decisions. What is the next thing for you? What is something that you are excited about? What is a goal that you have? What's something that you're working towards where there might be some barriers or obstacles or loops that you need to uncover and rewrite in order to get there?
Mhm. I do have a lot of, like, big goals, but in terms of, like, right now, I'm learning a lot every day. I have wonderful mentors at, like, my full-time job, and I do enjoy what I do, so I do it on the side, like, I love growth marketing, I think that's a whole different, conversation, but I love it, so I do it call it after hours. So I think there's a lot of potential there. I know one day I am an entrepreneur, I think it's a mindset, I don't think it's what you are physically doing. And I've always just had those tendencies, so I do want to end up, like, just running my own show, eventually, but I don't really have the, call it, idea or whatever it is as I am right now, and I think that's because I'm still learning. And who knows, maybe it is just, "Hey, you need to work this out because you need to start trusting you'll be fine on your own," or whatever the, we'll call it, block is. And I've always wanted to end up out west, and just, like, where my life sits right now, I don't know, like, when or how that'll happen, but that's the magic of it, and that's what I, even, like, probably more than anyone, need to just keep reassuring myself, like, okay, whatever is meant to happen will happen. The how is the magical part. You don't actually have to sit and measure it out. It's great to have goals and it's great to think about it, but to tie yourself to the how is just a waste.
Absolutely. I feel like we can get so caught up in the how when really it's
Mhm.
where do you want to head? How do you want to feel? What does joy look like? What does it feel like? How do you define these sorts of things? And they're going to be different for everyone, right? Like your definition of success, your definition of joy, your definition of love, they're all going to be different from maybe my version or your partner's version or your parents' version. And so I think that's the beauty as well. We all get to be artists and creators of our own life. And I love how you shared I have so many goals and I do wanna create something and I do want to maybe host something, but I don't know what that is yet. And I get to continue to follow the breadcrumbs to figure that out because that is what has gotten you to where you are today. And so one thing that I've worked on with clients before is what is that zone of genius as well? What are the things
I
that you
love that.
love? And then what are the things that you are really good at? And how can you pull inspiration from that to give you more clarity on what breadcrumbs to follow towards whatever it is that you're going to create next? When you think about that, what are some things that you absolutely love to do and that you are really great at?
That's a good question. I would say I really love communicating with people, and I think part of it too is, like, learning what you love, and that will change over time. Like, I notice if I, like, today, for example, okay, it was rainy outside, like, I didn't really have a lot of meetings until the afternoon. So the morning, I was, like, really tired. And as soon as I got into the swing of, like, meetings and everything, like, right now I have so much energy. And I think that's so interesting, and this is just something that I've noticed even recently, like, I get energy from talking about ideas with people and getting excited about growth or marketing or, like, those kinds of things, and I think that's why I love marketing, is because it's such a growth, like, career, call it, like, you're always striving for something, you're always creating, and I think that, you know, I wouldn't in no means, like, consider myself a creative in terms of what that usually means. But, like, the brainstorming the ideas and seeing things come together, like, I've really started to love that. I think I'm trying to not tie myself so much to what physically the task is yet, because that's really where I find my excitement is in the conversations and the ideas and seeing it come to life and seeing how everyone playing a role, like, comes together. Um, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, and I feel like I there's something I wanna follow up on there because you get so excited when you talk about the energy that comes from talking to people, ideas, ideation, creating strategy, and things like that, and I find it interesting that you said I wouldn't define myself as a creative in the traditional meaning of it, and so I'm curious, sometimes even those, like, little things can hold us back from, like, fully leaning into something because we're all creative at the end of the day, right? We're all
Mhm.
creative. You can be creative in how you parent, in how you are as a partner, in, like, how curious you are in art and dancing, like, literally so many ways. Strategy, like, that's so creative. Ideation, that is literally a function of being creative. So it's like all these things that you mentioned are creative. And so I'm curious, how can you redefine what being creative means to you so that you can begin to fully lean into and embody that within you?
Huh, that's a good call out. I think just traditionally, and you know what, I'm definitely taking this from, like, the education path, is, like, when you're in school, the arts, right? Like drama and painting, and I was never really, like, super, don't give me a pen and paper and tell me to draw something beautiful because it'll be beautiful in my own way, but you're not gonna wanna put it up. You know what I mean? And I think that's where that comes from, is that I was good at math, I was good at writing, which is a form of art as well. being like I was good in numbers and things that had a pattern and whatever that is, but I think that gets a connotation of being like very predictable and like strategic, but like the boring way. Whereas I think you can come up with a great idea and be super creative about it. And then this is just my marketing brain speaking, but then you validate it with numbers. And there's that whole process. And I think that can be like a misconception, even in the field of marketing. Like it's very creative in the modern day and age. Like you need data and you need to be able to back it up. You need to be able to try things and pivot. Those kinds of things are very creative, but you can also get stuck in the non-creative numbers. And so it's merging those two. And it really is like an art and a science in a sense.
It sounds to me like you're getting really close to that zone of genius because redefining what creative means to you and what that piece of you is within. And I love that you just brought in the more analytical, strategic side. And it's interesting that we are putting those two words together as well, because then you mentioned perfectly how that actually supports the more creative, artistic side. And so there's something about those two, like merging of worlds or blending of strategies or perspectives, that I feel is unique and could be leveraged and honed. And when you think about where you get to do that now, where you get to fully lean into that, is there a way that you could lean into that creative version of you and how you define it more, whether it's at work, life? I know you just moved, like designing the house, like anywhere. Is there somewhere that feels like, oh yeah, I can turn the dial up a little bit on my creativity and how I define it?
Oh, definitely. I would say the largest area is probably in my, like, freelance side. I was just doing advertising on, like, digital advertising in general, like, email and those kinds of things, and so I wasn't doing, like, the creative, which would be, like, the video, the image, whatever. So now I paused from it for a second and said, "Okay, like, this is fine, but I'm not, like, loving it. There's something missing," and I would go to work during the day and be talking big and talking about big ideas. And I think like I was working and looking at numbers that were more larger than what I was working with on the side. That's just the stage and the process of evolution in that way. And there's a different energy. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something very big about looking at a 6 digit number or 10 or whatever it is versus the 5 digit number or four. So when you get into that bigger space, you're like, ooh, I'm playing small here. Like, why? And it's just stepping back from that and saying, "Okay, what can I be doing that I actually like this strategy?" Like, I would be talking to entrepreneurs and saying, "Oh, this would be great to do, and this, and here's the data," and backing it, but it's not what they wanted to do, which is totally fine, and that's totally their call. But then I'm in a place where I'm like, "This is less exciting, like, where do I need to go?" And so I know that there's big opportunity for me to hone that area of my world into, like, things that I more so believe in and things that, like, I as a consumer would want. Like, the great thing that I love about marketing that I don't think is talked about nearly enough is it's literally just, like, talking to people, like, in a lot of different ways and, like, finding your people. Like, it's less and I think that's something that's just emerging in the, call it consumer world, is that I'm gonna buy from this brand because they made me laugh in an email last week, and, like, I have had that happen. There are those ways that I can be, call it living in my zone of genius, like, really in a different way, and I honestly, I don't think I've said that out loud until this moment. I'm just realizing I've always just been like, "Where do I fit?" But I think it's less of that and more of what do I love and who wants it? Who could use this?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you already know the laws of the universe, right? And the more you lean into that's what's going to come to you, those are the, yeah, opportunities that will end up coming to you. And you actually said something really interesting earlier. It was playing small in ways. How is not fully leaning into that creative genius that you have and maybe playing a little bit smaller to keep it safer? How is that holding you back from fully leaning into your zone of genius more?
I don't know that it's definitely holding me back, like, on an income side just because, like, when you go full into a project or whatever, like, that's what you're it's not the only goal, but it's a goal, and I think playing smaller in that way, like, when you're first starting, yeah, no doubt you're gonna start small. That is the way in, like,
Mhm, mhm.
100%, but I think you have to get over your imposter syndrome or just that confidence gap when you make that leap, it makes a big difference. So yeah, it's leaning into that. And the other part too is or I don't know about you, but I find myself like I get more stressed about it if I'm not really sure that I'm doing 100% of what I want to be doing. It feels like a dread. And it's tricky because sometimes that dread is like your own fear. And sometimes the dread is this isn't the work that I want to be doing. Like, why am I avoiding this? And that's just something that you have to observe in your own behavior. Why
Mhm.
am I avoiding sending 10 networking requests? Like, why? What is it? I have the time. Like, why do I feel tired? Like, why? And just keep
Mhm.
asking yourself that and journal it out or whatever you need to do to figure it out. Cause usually it's you holding yourself back because you feel so safe in your small little bubble, and
Mhm.
there's always a way to expand.
Yeah, absolutely. The fear of success, right? I know that there is something for me on the other end, but I don't know what that means. And I don't know what that looks like. And yeah, I completely resonate with that. And I think everything you said is so interconnected, right? And this shows up in all of us. There's always an area that maybe we're playing smaller in that we get to look at. There's always this opportunity to continue to iterate what your zone of genius looks like. And that's going to be evolving. It might be different today than it is in 1 year. And so it's following that joy, right? Going back to what you mentioned earlier, following that joy of what does feel good, what do I want to be doing? Why am I resisting this? And if I am resisting it, like where is it coming from? Am I doing this because I feel like I should be doing this? Or am I doing this because it lights me up and I want to be doing it? And
Yeah.
or is it fear, right? Like, what is the underlying resistance really saying? And using it as an opportunity to get clearer on following your breadcrumbs, following joy and what that looks like. So it's if you have an opportunity or you're thinking about networking, what criteria do you want to run that through? Like when you make a decision about who you're reaching out to or the types of companies that you want to work with or opportunities, how do you know what your yes and what your no feels like in your body? And what criteria do you want to run it through? Because I know for myself, I was like such an enthusiast, right? Every opportunity, it was, oh my God, that sounds amazing. So cool. Want to dive in. And then I started getting so overwhelmed because then you start getting to a point where there's so many opportunities because you get so clear and then you start to realize, oh, actually, I'm not that clear. I need to get more clear because this doesn't feel as good as this opportunity. So clearly, my criteria needs to be more specific. And
Mhm.
when you think about that and leaning into your zone of genius, leaning into what excites you and what gives you energy, which one of the things you had mentioned was being around people, I would imagine that there's some specifics to that as well. And following your yes, your inner yes, and your inner joy, what are some of those criteria for you so that starting today, you can start to run all your decisions and all your actions sort of through some of those criteria?
Honestly, I think I'm still ironing this one out, to be completely honest. But I think it's does it expand me? Do I feel really comfortable? I think that's a really good check. If I feel too comfortable in a situation, it's okay. Maybe this is just, the old zone and like where can I go with this? So I think that's one. I think it's just if it's actually exciting and there's a like check that you can do is like you said before, like, why am I resisting this? Is it because of fear? And oh my gosh, this would make me big. And again, back to the fear of success thing, like what falls if this goes right? And then it's no, this is actually all good and it all gets to be good. And just coming back to that. I think really I've just been trying to lean into joy. And again, I don't think you ever master this. I really don't. Maybe very later in life, but I've definitely not mastered it yet. But yeah, it's just leaning into the joy and am I learning? Am I growing? Do I like what I'm learning? Like, do I feel like I used to get out of bed, go onto my laptop and listen to a 2-hour finance lecture? Now, maybe that's exciting for some people. I dreaded it like every time. And it wasn't even like I dreaded it, like I was not even there. Like it was like just blank up here. There was nothing, and it's not that I hated finance, it's that there was no connection, like, you are, like, siloed, and there's a difference between being energized by others and, like, being lonely is a totally different thing than enjoying your own company, and that's something else that has helped me and to just figure out what I wanna be doing is just spend time alone, like, you don't always need to call all your friends, say, "What do I do in this situation?" Because they're not you, like, they don't know. And I think that's something that everyone resorts to just because it's easier and you're connecting with others and that's awesome. But A lot of the time, it's just something that they probably don't even know. Like, they can look at you and say, "Oh, that's coming from this. You should work on that." Like, most people can't do
Mhm.
that. So it's just spending time alone. And yeah, honestly, I haven't figured out 100% of my criteria. And I think that's okay because there's so much opportunity. But I do know that and something that I've learned just throughout my entire life is like you have to say no in order for what you want to say yes to be space for that. Yeah, following the breadcrumbs and letting it fall into place. And when things don't fall into place, it's okay. There's something else. Then this just wasn't right for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you were just like, I don't know all the criteria yet, because that opens up. I think when people think they know everything or think I have it all figured out or I've found joy in all of this, it almost closes the space for new information to come in. And so now you have this opportunity to follow what joy feels like, because it sounds like you actually really have a clear association with the feeling of joy and the feeling of a yes in your body, because you've mentioned instances where you feel the no, right? You feel the resistance, you feel the drain, you feel the dread, you feel all of that. And rather than thinking of it as following and filtering things through the criteria, it could be following what it feels like to be in joy and to be in your yes, not somebody else's yes, because it's going to be this is unique to you, trusting that. And then when you start to get that data, you can start to see the themes and start to see the criteria essentially that emerges of the
Mhm.
similarities between the events that really do speak to you and really are that yes. And so when you think about that feeling in your body, what does your yes feel like and what does joy feel like?
I think it's the absence of like worry. It's like a calm, but an excitement. Like you almost feel like you have a fire in your chest, but not in the anxious way and like the excited way. Like when you wake up on your birthday and you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's the best day ever." And then you go that whole day and you're like, "I wish I could live every day like this." Like you can. And honestly, I noticed that on my birthday this year. Like I did all the things I wanted to do and I was like, "This is the greatest day ever." And it's you don't ever sure you have to do things you don't love all the time, but like, really, you get to decide, right? If you don't love your job, like, start learning something else that you like and make that move or whatever it is. So, I think, yeah, it's leaning into that.
I love it. One question, and this is a little bit of a pivot, but I'm excited to ask it because I'm curious what your thoughts are. When we before we got on the podcast, we spoke about Gen Z, and I spoke about being a millennial and some of the stereotypes that I think come with that and the resistance that we have to the stereotypes of the generation. So I'm curious, what was some of that resistance? So when you think about Gen Z, what do you think the assumptions are that people say about Gen Z, and why do you resist it? What's the truth? What do you want people to know?
I just I think that there's just such a misconception and not just with like generationally, like just with anything. Like there is no like one size fits all for anything, right? There are many different people that I know that maybe think a little bit older. I've always been told I'm an old soul. So I'm very mature for my age. I've always heard that. So I don't know. I don't think I could call out like one stereotype. I think something that comes up is just we just want to be on our phones. And I think the generation after me, I forget what it is, I think it's Gen Alpha, is like even more that way and short attention spans. We're always on TikTok. Like I delete social media when I feel like I have a habit of going on it. So I think it's just like opening more eyes and not in a generational sense, but just in a like human sense to you don't have to really fall into all these holes of things.
Mhm. Yes. Who likes to be put in a box, right? To be like, "Oh,
Yeah,
you're a Gen Z,
exactly.
it must mean you love being on your phone or you love doing this or you love doing that." And those things can all be true, sure. But, like, the curiosity behind it and, like, you just mentioned, like, you are willing to shut your phone off or delete apps when a lot of people probably struggle with that, but that is a boundary that you've created and, like, something that you've created to deal with the technology and social media and everything that's thrown at us, right? So it's like
Mhm.
what I'm hearing as well is it's less about the definitions and the stereotypes behind it and putting people in a box. And it's also knowing that two truths can exist at the same time and generation doesn't define you. There's so much wisdom that we each hold within us. And yeah, just inviting people to be more curious about what that looks
Yeah.
like and getting to know people at
And
a soul level.
for sure. And even age, right? If you just looked at me, you'd be like, you shouldn't be where you are. Statistically, or whatever you want to call it, you should not be able to do that. But there's this whole shift happening. I think it's really magical in you can learn like pretty much anything. Like, and because I am a younger generation, like people will look to you to know the technology. And it doesn't always have to be as dramatic as like, how do I work a phone? And it's my grandma calling me. And she's like, how do I get Snapchat or whatever? But there is just a piece to like this generation and generations to come, like we are used to the rapid advancement of technology. And I think that is ever growing, and there's so much potential with that. And you hear so much headlines are evil, like they are just negative all the time. And I think that is just not ideal anyways. But you can get so strapped into this, oh, technology is bad. But really, like these generations are used to the rapid pace of it. So we can pick it up and adapt it. And I think that's something very unique. And so now we are teaching these new skills and marketing, even just in general, as it used to be people making a brand strategy and putting up advertisements that are going on the billboard. Like now, like that is like this much of it. And I know it was a large field before, and it's still large, but in a different way. And that is something very unique. And so when you're interacting in the world, like you do know things as a young person that your boss or the CEO at your company like doesn't know, and that's the value, right? So you can't call it dim your light by just playing your role. So I think I was very blessed to be able to not skip that. Like I'm still young in my career, but I'm not afraid to say I think this and this is why. And it's just doing it a lot that builds that. And that's something I've learned as well. Like just you do have to build confidence and exercise it to strengthen it.
I love that. I was gonna ask if you had any quotes to end on, but I feel like that was a
Oh,
perfect one. You have to build confidence and exercise it. Is that what you said? You have to build confidence?
yeah, that is what I said. But honestly, if there's one thing that like I would end this with, I would say it's just find your joy and like cling to it and let that be a guide. And it's okay to feel joy. Like nothing's gonna happen. You're okay.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful reminder. And thank you. Thank you for that. And it was so good having you here on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your personal stories, sharing your experiences, and just, yeah, being vulnerable here with us as well. So we appreciate
Yeah, I
it and
enjoyed
we're
it.
excited to see you again in the future.
Yeah, I loved it. Thanks so much for having me.
Like what you heard and want more? Stay connected with our community on social media using the links below. Like us on your favorite podcast provider and sign up for the Conscious Loop newsletter, where we only send you goodies with one intent: to break your unconscious loops. If you have an unconscious loop you want to break free from, let us know so we can feature that loop on the show. Info and show notes, and we'll see you next time in the Conscious Loop.